Well, I think it's prudent to talk about, that whole COVID-19 thing. It's pretty viral.
Deep sigh.
I'm sorry.
You're not.
I'm not.
No.
Um,
Okay.
and this is why there's editing in videos.
Yes.
Because you can do those awkward things and then just cut them and be like, that wasn't that awkward. Yet it was awkward.
This whole video is going to be awkward.
It's going to be very awkward.
It's fine.
Because we're talking about relationships.
So, as you know, our Life Nights have been canceled. And the next couple of Life Nights in our series, we're going to talk about relationships and kind of bouncing off of the idea of equal, which is where we talked about our identity as sons and daughters of God. So to bounce off of that, one of the main things we wanted to discuss was masculinity and femininity and what role that plays for us.
Right, because relationships, whether they're dating or friendships, can take on many different roles. And when we sort of fail to recognize our role in those relationships, whether we're a man or a woman, we can oftentimes sort of lead ourselves astray and not really live out to the fullest of who we have the potential of being or who God says we are. So we just have to make sure that we're living in right accord with, the way He made us. The bodies.
Exactly. Bouncing off what we talked about at our last Life Night too, there are a lot of lies in the world, particularly about masculinity and femininity, and both men and women are fed a lot of these lies and believe a lot of them. So I think it really takes defining what are the main characteristics of men and women as we are created by God. There's a great photo that actually Emily Wilson has used in some of her talks before from a hurricane where there's a man carrying a young mother, and that young mother is in turn carrying her child. And so that's a great illustration of, just generally speaking, men's roles as protectors, right? And they have this outward strength, and women have their own strength that is nurturing, right? It might look more inward in some ways. That doesn't mean that they're any less strong. So for those of you ladies out there who are listening to the world, and especially radical feminism, saying you want to be a strong, independent woman. Well, yes, we want to be strong and we want to be independent, but we don't want to do that at the expense of men, right? And so a lot of radical feminists will tell you, put down men so that we can be strong, right? So that we can take their place. And that's clearly not what we want to do as daughters of God, because we want to build up sons of God.
On the men's side of that, a lot of times we hear, you get the guys who are sort of well, who'd you see last weekend? Or when maybe you had a one night stand or something with some girl, and they're oh, high five, good job. And really what was actually happening in that situation, it was two people coming together and sort of using one another for some need that they both felt, but they weren't actually living out who they were meant to be. And men are not supposed to be conquerors in this sense. To what Bernadette said, we're supposed to be complementary, right? If you look at the male and the female body and who we are, we're meant to be together. We don't make sense without one another. So clearly, it's not one is better than the other, but both are equal in dignity and in value in the way that we're created. The man being stronger, bigger, that protector, is meant to foster the woman's ability to be that nurturer and life giver. And I mean, who is the highest in all of created order? Mary. So guys, if you're up on that peg here, bring it down just a little bit. Humility is a good thing.
I was gonna say humility is good on both ends, right?
Correct.
And I think that comes into play too. We talked a little bit about romantic relationships or dating relationships, but I think this really plays a big role in friendships as well. Men, you want to be able to sort of be protectors of your friends who are girls, and girls, you want to be nurturing of your guy friends in some way, right? And so that means being supportive, building them up, also being humble, right? And recognizing that even in friendships, you kind of have a responsibility to the other person, especially in romantic relationships, but in friendships too. And in that responsibility, you kind of have to recognize, okay, there's an eternal soul, immortal soul, sitting right next to me, and vice versa. Yeah, right? C.S. Lewis is you're never going to walk by a mere mortal. We are all immortal. And so I think being humbled by that fact and recognizing, okay, God has an amazing plan for each and every single one of us, that there's a necessary humility that comes with being a good friend and being in a healthy and holy relationship.
Absolutely. And ultimately too, with talking about both friendship relationships as well as dating relationships, a dating relationship is meant to take on first that friendship. If we don't first have that virtuous friendship, that other person who's actually calling us onwards, who's helping us to move forward with them in the pursuit of virtue. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about virtuous friendships as two people holding each other accountable, right? And you know, the funny thing about virtuous friendships is they're not always the relationship that is like lovey-dovey. They're not always the relationship that's affectionate, but rather like a virtuous friendship is a friendship where you're willing to speak truth into each other's lives, where you're willing to say to whoever that is, whether it's, you know, your guy friend or your girlfriend, to say like, hey, I want to strive for something greater and you have a role in that. And I want us to work together on that, holding me accountable for the times that I fail, the times that I'm, you know, maybe being held by vice, but also in the times that I'm, you know, practicing virtue and maybe being a good example. So to really enter into like a deeper relationship with someone, that's ultimately where all relationships should start. Whether it's our friendship or moving into some sort of a dating relationship where that accountability is on another level, right? Because you're pursuing marriage with somebody at that point, and that's kind of a big deal.
Kind of, just a little bit.
Yeah, tiny bit. But it's also so joyful, right? To be able to sit into those virtuous friendships, those virtuous relationships, and really be able to get to know somebody for who they are, and to understand too that like there is nobody else on this entire world like you. Like you are specific and you are unique and you were created with a purpose for love and joy and goodness. And ultimately that's what we're called to call each other to, is that joy and love and goodness and virtue.
Exactly. And I think bouncing off what you said too about like calling each other on and like being able to point out vices leads to like honesty is integral in any relationship, any friendship. If you're not honest with that person, like get the heck on out. And honesty too, like it all comes from the Lord, right? Like all virtues and all good things come from the Lord. And so while we may sort of balk at some kind of honesty because it's difficult, or we fear the outcome of being honest with another person, ultimately that's healing and that's important. And it may hurt for a moment, but in the end, that honesty is important. Being able to like establish, okay, like in the case of a romantic relationship, like where are we in this relationship? We need to actually define what this is. Or in a friendship too, like calling out your friend if they're really struggling with a serious vice, temptation, some kind of addiction, right? Being honest with them, because that's not willing their good. Again, if we define love as to will the good of the other, and we want to love our friends and more than friends and family, if we're not being honest and willing to point out those hard things, then what are we doing, right? We're doing them a disservice. And really, in some sense, it's kind of a sin of omission, right? If we're called to call on our brothers and sisters in Christ and call them to greater things, then not bringing up those hard topics and calling them on is a sin.
Absolutely. There's an old saying too that is like, show me your 5 closest friends and I'll show you who you are. And I think that speaks volumes in terms of like how we can really examine the people that we're trying to become, because the people who are closest to us often reflect the values that we hold. So if our 5 closest friends are involved in some things that maybe aren't super healthy or super helpful when it comes to striving to be the best version of ourselves we can be, we might have to make some hard decisions in those moments. And either we need to be courageous enough in some sense and fortuitous enough to call those friends who maybe aren't great influence into a greater friendship with us, into a more virtuous place in life. And if they're not willing to move, like we might also have to make a hard decision and say, I'm gonna have to like start to put some space between me and this person for my own sake, and maybe even too for theirs, to allow them to feel some of that separation. I mean, this is a good example of what's going on right now with COVID-19, right? That it sort of seems like the Lord is drawing away from us, but at the same time, like what he's doing is he's drawing us closer to him. And in the same way, that can take shape in friendships where you're sort of backing away can actually draw that person out of kind of their standstill and call them to something greater. So it's really important that we examine the friends that we have around us and how those friendships, those people are shaping us into the person that we are now. And like take heart, right? Like be courageous in that and be truthful. And to what Bernadette said, like it may hurt kind of, and it may not be the most comfortable situation, but any situation of growth that really helps us never really is easy if we look at it honestly. like everything requires some sort of a sacrifice, right? The things that we're passionate about, think about the word passion, right? During Holy Week, when Jesus suffers his passion, right? What is he passionate about? He's passionate about us. And so when we're passionate about something, it means that we're going to have to suffer for that as well. So if you're passionate about a friendship, it means that you might have to make hard decisions. If you're passionate about a dating relationship, that also means that you will have to make hard decisions, whether it's time commitments, more than likely it'll probably be personal commitments of how do I need to change my life in order to best be the man or the woman that God is calling me to be. So if it's a dating relationship, I can best call this person into a place of holiness and ultimately lead them into, a sanctified relationship with the Lord.
Absolutely. And speaking of Jesus, right, and how we should emulate him in all things, it also calls to mind the importance of forgiveness. And I know that a lot of us sort of balk at that word, like, do I really have to forgive this person, right? And a lot of us even balk at confession, right? Do I really have to go confess my sins to a priest? But I don't know how many of you guys have experienced this, but actually going to confession and feeling that sense that you're healed, right? Feeling that you have a clean soul now, as difficult as it was maybe to step in and to begin to admit your sins. I think the same can be said in relationships with other people. And we live in a culture where everyone is becoming so increasingly isolated, and that COVID-19 doesn't make it any easier. But I think in that idea of being in relationship with other people, that involves your friends, that involves your significant other if you have one, and that involves your family. And I think especially with family is where we often need to speak some forgiveness into our lives and have forgiveness spoken into our lives. So I encourage you too to take a few moments after you're watching this video to just reflect and pray about where you're at with your family. Pray about your friends too, and any dating relationships as well. But I think that right now, especially as most of us are home with our families, for those of you guys who are stuck pretty much 24/7 with your parents, there doubtless have been some spats, but still we're called into holy relationship with our parents, with our siblings. So I just ask you to reflect on that and to ask the Lord for the grace and the strength you need to be able to ask for forgiveness and to give forgiveness. Maybe there are some old hurts and some old wounds that need addressing. Maybe it's something really, really small, and some small little blow up that happened during one day. It's nothing terribly deep-seated, but even in those small moments where forgiveness is needed, when that's spoken to that other person, when that's received, there's a lot of grace and a lot of healing that comes in that too. So I invite you to really take that to heart and to spend a few moments reflecting on that.
So recap, what all have we covered? We've talked about relationships, what those kind of look like. We talked about the roles of men and women, whether that's in a friendship or a dating relationship. We've talked about family relationships, the importance of forgiveness. I would say ultimately, like, what all of this is leading to is like being virtuous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being Christ-like.
The sun came out.
I know, but yeah, like it's ultimately about being the light in the relationships around you, being that person who can point the way to something greater, to something better, and is willing to sacrifice for that, for the things that they care about. So yeah. Do we want to go over any specifics of anything? I feel like the only specific thing would be like dating.
Yeah.
Hey guys, don't be stupid.
Yeah.
If you like someone, just ask them out. I promise it's like better than if you don't.
Honesty. We talked about this.
Yes. If you're not honest with someone that you're interested in, it can lead to a lot of confusion, some hurt feelings. So if you are looking at dating someone, this is specifically for the guys, like, just like take courage, be the initiator, ask that person out. I'm gonna be honest, they could say no. That's part of life. They could say no.
Part of the risk.
It is definitely part of the risk, but it's a necessary part of the risk, right? Because like ultimately, like as men, if we're called to be like protectors and we're called to like be strong, like this is a prime moment for you to show that you are strong, right? That you are strong enough to say like, I'm willing to face rejection specifically because I want to pursue you. Like that's a big compliment, right? I don't know, I can't speak necessarily for exactly what that is like. But.
Yeah, no, I think too from like the girl's perspective on the flip side, girls, if you notice a guy wanting to hang out with you but he's not being clear, ask him to be clear. I know for me, and for many of you too who really want the man to be the initiator in a relationship, there's like kind of a wrestling and like a struggle that happens with that. It's like, I really don't want to say anything first, like I want him to ask me out, but sometimes guys are kind of clueless. So
It's true.
Be-
It's just
be
true.
clear.
It's not sometimes. It's like all the time.
So be clear and don't be afraid to ask. And you can, you know, phrase it in a way that still puts him on the spot where he has to be that person to actually ask you out. But ladies, don't be afraid to have those conversations either. And also don't put men down, because they really are putting themselves out there, you know, when they ask someone out on a date. And I think Jackie Francois talked about this in a video, but she said, you know, ladies, if a guy asks you out, unless you're for sure he's gonna like murder you, say yes. So seriously, like say yes. If he's, you know, a halfway decent guy, there's really no harm in that. And I think for those of you too who have seen or heard of the movie The Dating Project, a first date should be pretty low key. So there should absolutely be no strings attached, no risk. The recommendation, and I totally recommend checking this out. This is actually an assignment that a professor at a college put forth for her students. That a first date should be between an hour and an hour and a half. It should be no more than $10, so something like coffee or ice cream, and no physical contact aside from an A-frame hug. So if you follow those guidelines, you're gonna be golden. But yeah, so ladies, don't make such a big deal out of accepting a date either, because you never know. You'll have fun, and you know, even if it doesn't end up working out, you had a good time. So. And
you got like free ice cream.
Yeah.
Or free coffee or something
Right?
like that. Ultimately, like dating, like it should be fun, right? It should be something to like, you know, get excited about, but it should also be something that's serious, right? Like we should be understanding like what is the purpose, like why are we doing this, right? Is it just to like find emotional support? Because if that's the case, is that really that healthy?
No.
The whole point of dating ultimately is to pursue like that vocation, that like grander sacrament of marriage, which is hard, especially for like everyone in high school, right? Like that's a very convoluted time. There's a lot going on. That doesn't mean you can't date, but it does mean that you need to call to mind like what are your intentions, right? Are you actually trying to pursue that vocation of marriage? Are you trying to figure out like what that looks like, and if somebody in your life does fit the bill of being a wife or a husband, because ultimately that's what it's about. And also in that same process, if you are dating someone and the relationship is not moving towards that, you might have to go back to that drawing board of like, is this a healthy relationship? Is this something that I need to be pursuing right now? Or do I need to like maybe have a hard discussion or make a hard decision? Something I would say too is like, just know in all of these hard decisions, in all of these situations with relationships, like the Lord is there, right? Like he's so intimately there. And so often we just sort of forget about that, that it's like, he sort of leaves us to make these hard decisions as if he doesn't want to be a part of it, but like that's absolutely not the truth. Like God is there in all of our hard decisions, in all of our heartbreak, whatever that looks like. So again, like just take courage, be fortuitous, like be virtuous. Yeah, love people. That's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a very good thing.
Love people, use things, don't use people.
Yes, love people, use things. That's a podcast. Was a podcast. Still a podcast? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't stay up on the times enough with that. But yeah, so we hope that this information was like helpful. We're gonna try and do a follow-up video at some point just to see if there's any questions or things that you, for any of you viewers who see this and like maybe something sort of stirs up some questions or some restlessness, like please let us know. We're here to answer questions. We want to help. I can't speak for everyone, but I know for like us, we love this topic. This is an amazing topic. Like who doesn't want to talk about St. JP2's theology of the body and like the purpose of relationships? It's so cool.
My man.
Yeah.
Y'all know this.
Yeah. We're more nerds than some people, but you know, specifically church nerds.
But I think I've given like 2 or 3 talks on JP2, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's my favorite.
He's kind of pretty cool.
Little
He
bit.
like skied and wrote poetry and went backpacking for weeks.
And he
on
was a
end.
theater nerd.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, so he's kind of a cool dude. He's also a saint, which means that he's really cool. So if you doubted it, get over it. Anyways, guys, this has been great. Can't wait to hear back from you guys. And once again, like we're praying for you. We hope to hear back from you soon with any questions, and stay holy. Such a weird video.
Awkward. Don't die.
That's gonna get left in.